The warship Crimson Fang dropped out of hyperspace above the blue and green world that humans called New Eden. Commander of the Red Dragon Pack stood on his bridge and looked down at the planet below. His scaled hide shimmered with excitement as he watched the clouds move across the surface. This was a beautiful world, and soon it would belong to his people. The Red Dragon Pack had earned their name through centuries of blood and fire. They were raiders and killers who left nothing but ash behind them. Their reptilian bodies stood 8 feet tall with claws that could tear through metal and fangs that dripped with poison. For 300 years, no species had ever defeated them in battle. They had conquered 47 worlds across the galaxy, and this human colony would be number 48. Turned to his tactical officer who was studying the screens in front of him. The officer was younger than but just as hungry for victory. His name was, and he had served under for 10 years. Looked up from his station and hissed softly. He told that the colony had detected their approach and the humans were trying to evacuate. Their ships were leaving the surface, but they were slow and there were not enough of them. Showed his teeth in what passed for a smile among his kind. He told to let them run because the fear would make the hunt more satisfying. There was nothing better than prey that tried to escape. New Eden was a farming world that was home to about 12,000 human settlers. According to the information that spies had gathered, the colony had very little military protection. There was a small group of colonial marines and a few old platforms in orbit. It would not be enough to stop them. It would be a slaughter. The Crimson Fang began its descent through the atmosphere. 6 assault followed behind it, and each one carried 50 of the finest warriors the Red Dragon Pack had to offer. 300 killers were about to land on this peaceful farming world. Below them, the colonial capital of Haven stretched across a green valley. Could see the tiny figures of humans running through the streets like insects. In an underground bunker beneath Haven's main government building, Lieutenant Commander Hank watched the alien ships come down from the sky. He was a tired man of 53 years with grey hair at his temples and old scars on his arms. He had been a soldier for most of his life and he had seen many things, but he had never seen anything like this. Hank commanded the Colonial Marine Unit on New Eden, all 47 of them. They were good soldiers, but they were not enough, not nearly enough for what was coming. Corporal sat at her computer station and her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. She was a small woman with dark hair and sharp eyes. She had joined the Marines 5 years ago and Hank trusted her completely. When she looked up at him, her face was pale. Told him that the ships matched the profile of raider vessels. She said that according to the military database, they belonged to something called the Red Dragon Pack. Hank felt his blood turn cold in his veins. Every Marine knew the stories about the Red Dragon Pack. They did not take prisoners, they did not make deals, they killed everything that moved and then they took whatever they could sell. Entire worlds had been emptied by these monsters. He asked how long they had before the ships landed. She checked her screens again and said 12 minutes, maybe less. Hank looked at the tactical display in front of him. 12,000 civilians were depending on him. 12,000 men and women and children who had come to this world looking for a peaceful life. And all he had to protect them was 47 Marines and a handful of old weapons. He knew what he had to do. He gave the order to begin evacuating everyone to the mountain shelters. The children would go first, and then the elderly, and then everyone else. The Marines would hold the line for as long as they could. Started to say something, but then she stopped. They both knew that holding the line would not last long enough. There were too many and too strong, but they would try anyway because that was what Marines did. Hank left the bunker and stepped out into the streets of Haven. The sky above was filled with smoke and the sound of alien engines. People were running everywhere and parents were carrying their children and old people were being helped along by younger ones. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. The colonists had practiced for emergencies before. He found Sergeant Grant near the eastern barricade. She was a small woman with red hair and cold blue eyes. She had been a Marine for 15 years and she was one of the best soldiers Hank had ever known. She was checking her rifle when he approached. Looked up at him and asked what their orders were. Hank told her to hold this position for as long as possible. He said to give the civilians time to reach the shelters. And did not ask any questions. She understood what he was not saying. She knew that they would probably die here today, but she just turned back to her rifle. Hank moved through the colony and checked on each of his Marine positions. They were spread thin across the city, too thin, but there was nothing he could do about that. He told each of them the same thing: hold the line, buy time, protect the civilians. The first landed at the edge of the city. The ground shook when it touched down. Then the ramp opened and the warriors came pouring out. They were huge and terrifying with scales that gleamed in the sunlight and weapons that with deadly energy. Hank watched from behind a barricade as the aliens spread out through the streets. He raised his rifle and took aim at the nearest one. He was about to fire when he heard something that made him pause. It was the sound of children crying. Somewhere behind him in the city, there were children who had not been evacuated yet, children who were scared and alone. He thought about his own daughter who had died years ago on another world. He thought about all the children on New Eden who deserved a chance to grow up. Then he pulled the trigger and the battle began. They were fast and strong, but the Marines knew these streets. They used every building and every corner to slow the enemy down. For every Marine that fell, they took 3 aliens with them, but it was not enough. It could never be enough. Hank knew that this was not a battle they could win, but every minute they fought was another minute for the children to escape, and that was worth dying for. The battle for Haven lasted 3 hours. By the time the sun began to set, they had pushed deep into the colony and controlled most of the city. Fires burned in the streets and the sound of gunfire echoed between the buildings. The humans were losing. Hank crouched behind a broken wall and counted his remaining ammunition. He had started the day with 47 Marines. Now he had 24. 23 of his people had died fighting to protect this colony. Each one of them had taken enemies with them, but they had hundreds more to spare. His radio crackled and his voice came through. She told him that the mountain shelters were almost full. Most of the civilians had made it to safety, but there was a problem. Hank asked what kind of problem. Said that the neonatal care center had not been evacuated. The Barbies, they were too fragile to move quickly. There were 47 infants in that facility, and they could not be transporting to the mountain shelters. The medical staff had chosen to stay behind with them. Hank felt his heart sink. He knew that building. It was an underground facility near the center of town. The Marines had been pushed back past that area an hour ago. They controlled that part of the city now. He asked if there were any Marines near the facility. She checked her screens and said yes. 5 Marines had fallen back to that position and were defending the entrance. Sergeant Grant was leading them. Hank closed his eyes for a moment. Was one of his best soldiers, but 5 Marines could not hold against the Red Dragon Pack forever. He had to find a way to help them. Commander walked through the burning streets of Haven and felt satisfaction in his chest. The battle was going well. The humans had fought harder than expected, but they were still losing. By morning, this colony would belong to the Red Dragon Pack. One of his scouts approached and bowed his head in respect. The scout was covered in blood, and some of it was his own. He told that they had located a structure of interest. It was a medical facility built underground, and the entrance was heavily defended. Asked how heavily. The scout said there were 5 human soldiers. They fought like animals protecting their young. 6 warriors had died trying to get past them. Was surprised. 6 of his warriors killed by 5 humans was unusual. These were not ordinary defenders. Something important was inside that facility. He decided to see it for himself. When arrived at the underground entrance, he found a scene of intense combat. The 5 human Marines had built a barricade from broken furniture and debris. They fired with perfect accuracy at any who came close. Bodies of his warriors lay scattered across the ground. He recognized the tactics immediately. These humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. They were buying time for something. He asked his officers what was inside the facility. One of them consulted a captured computer terminal and said it was a neonatal care center. It was a place for newly born human offspring, infants. Felt something strange move inside his chest. It was a feeling he had not experienced in many years. Among the young were considered sacred. It was an old belief from before the wars, before the Red Dragon Pack became killers. Even now, after centuries of bloodshed, no true would harm an infant of any species. It was the one line they did not cross. He raised his hand and ordered his warriors to hold their fire. They looked at him with confusion, but they obeyed. The gunfire stopped. Stepped forward with his weapons lowered. He called out to the human soldiers and said he was commander of the Red Dragon Pack. He said he wanted to talk. For a long moment there was silence. Then a woman's voice answered. She said her name was Sergeant Grant. She asked what he wanted. Said he knew they were protecting young ones, infants. He asked how many. Another pause, then answered. She said there were 47 Barbies in the facility. Some of them had been born that very day. The colony had been evacuating, but there was no time to move the infants safely. They were too small and too fragile. Turned to his officers and told them to secure the area. He said no one was to enter the facility without his permission. His second-in-command looked shocked. He reminded that their orders were to destroy everything. Growled and said he knew their orders, but he would not be remembered as the commander who killed sleeping Barbies. He asked if that was clear. The officer stepped back and said nothing more. Approached the barricade alone. His weapons were holstered and his claws were empty. The human sergeant kept her rifle aimed at his chest. She was a small creature with bright red hair and eyes that showed no fear. He told her he was coming inside. He said he would not harm her or the infants. He gave her his word. Laughed. It was a bitter sound with no in it. She said the word of the Red Dragon Pack meant nothing. Slowly, he admitted that was true most of the time, but he said today it meant something. He climbed over the barricade and walked past the Marines. They kept their weapons ready, but they did not fire. He descended the stairs into the underground facility. What he found there would change his life forever. The neonatal care center was a long room filled with rows of clear containers. Each container held a tiny human baby. Machines softly and kept the infants warm and safe. Nurses in white clothing moved between the rows and checked on each baby carefully. But that was not what stopped in his tracks. In the middle of the room, he saw humans holding Barbies against their chests. Men and women of all ages were cradling the tiny creatures and rocking them gently. Some of the Barbies were crying, others were sleeping peacefully. These humans had stayed behind to die. They had stayed to hold Barbies that were not even their own. Had never seen anything like it. Stood frozen at the entrance to the nursery. His massive reptilian body blocked most of the doorway. The nurses and volunteers stared at him with wide eyes. Some of them trembled with fear, but none of them ran. None of them put down the Barbies they were holding. One woman in particular caught his attention. She was old by human standards with silver hair and a face marked by many years of life. She held 2 infants in her arms and rocked them gently back and forth. When she looked up, there was no fear in her eyes at all. She spoke in a calm, clear voice. She said he must be the monster who was destroying their home. Did not know how to respond. He had been called many things in his long life. Monster was accurate enough, but this old woman said it like she was commenting on the weather. She told him her name was Hayes. She said she had been a midwife in this colony for 30 years. She had helped bring hundreds of Barbies into the world. These 47 infants were the newest members of their community. They had been born yesterday or last week or last month. They did not know anything about war or aliens or death. They only knew warmth and milk and the sound of a heartbeat. Stepped toward him and found himself stepping backward. He was a commander who had conquered worlds. He had killed thousands without hesitation, but this tiny old human woman made him retreat. She said that if he was going to kill them, he should at least wait until they finished feeding the Barbies. Looked around the room slowly. He saw a young man who could not be more than 18 years old. The young human was cradling a premature infant so small it fit in one of his hands. He held the baby with incredible gentleness, as if it was the most precious thing in the universe. He saw a nurse in the corner singing softly to a baby who had a tube helping it breathe. The nurse was crying, but her voice did not shake. He saw Sergeant Grant sitting beside one of the incubators. Her rifle was on the floor next to her. Tears ran down her face as she watched over a tiny sleeping infant. These humans had stayed behind to die with Barbies that did not belong to them. Found his voice at last. He said he did not understand. He asked if these infants were their offspring. Shook her head. She explained that the parents of these Barbies were scattered across the colony. Some were evacuating, some were fighting, some were already dead. The Barbies had no one to protect them, so these volunteers had stayed behind because someone had to stay. Someone had to make sure the infants were not alone. Asked them why. Why would they stay to die for children that were not their own blood? Looked at him with something like pity in her old eyes. She said they stayed because that was what humans did. When there was a child in danger, someone had to step forward. It did not matter whose child it was. A baby was a baby. A life was a life. She stepped closer to him and held up the 2 infants in her arms. One was sleeping peacefully. The other was awake and looking around with curious eyes. She asked him if he could hold one while she adjusted her grip. Looked down at the tiny human creature. It was so small, so fragile. One of his claws could end its life in an instant. The baby looked up at him and made a soft sound. He had never held an infant before, not of any species. Slowly and carefully he reached out with his massive scaled hands, placed one of the Barbies in his arms. She showed him how to support its head, how to hold it against his chest. The infant weighed almost nothing. It was warm against his scales. It made small sounds and grabbed at one of his claws with tiny fingers that could not even wrap around the tip. Something cracked inside, something that had been frozen for centuries. His communication device beeped and a voice came through. It was one of his officers asking for orders. They wanted to know if they should continue the assault. looked at the baby in his arms. He looked at Hayes and her volunteers. He looked at the nurses who were still caring for the other infants even though death had walked through their door. He made a decision that would change the course of two civilizations. He spoke into his communicator and told all units to hold their positions. He ordered them not to advance on the medical facility. He repeated the order twice to make sure everyone understood. The voice on the other end sounded confused but acknowledged the command. Watched him with those calm, wise eyes. She asked him what he was going to do now. Carefully handed the baby back to her. He said he did not know. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had killed more people than he could count, but he had never met anyone who would die for a stranger's child. He asked her why humans were like this. Smiled at him. It was a gentle smile with no malice in it. She said humans were not always good. They could be cruel and selfish and violent just like any other species, but when it came to children, something changed. When it came to the young and the helpless, even the worst human might find courage. She said Barbies reminded them of what mattered, of what was worth protecting. Looked at the rows of incubators, 47 tiny lives that depended on the kindness of strangers. He told that he needed to make some calls. He said he did not know if he could stop what was happening, but he was going to try. For the first time in 300 years, the Red Dragon Pack had met something they could not destroy. They had met love. Stepped out of the nursery and contacted his ship in orbit. His hands were still warm from holding the human infant. His mind was racing with thoughts he had never had before. The face of High Commander appeared on his communication screen. Was the leader of this entire invasion force. He was older than and far more ruthless. His scales were dark grey and his eyes were cold like stones at the bottom of a frozen river. Asked for a status report. Took a deep breath and told him about the infant care facility. He explained that 47 human Barbies were inside and that they were being protected by civilians and a few soldiers. He said the Barbies were too fragile to be moved. His expression did not change. He simply ordered to destroy them and continue with the harvest. Closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was steady. He said he would not do that. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Asked to repeat himself. Said it again. He told that he would not slaughter infants in their beds. He was invoking the old code which said the young of any species must be protected. It was an ancient law among a law from before the endless wars. Laughed. It was an ugly sound full of contempt. He said the old code had not been followed in 200 years. He asked if he had gone mad. Said that maybe he had, but he would not kill Barbies. If wanted them dead, he could come down to the surface and do it himself. The argument continued for a long time. Threatened to remove from command. He threatened to have him executed for disobedience. He made many threats. But reminded him of something important. Half the warriors on the planet were from old families. Families that still remembered the traditions of their people. Traditions from before the Red Dragon Pack became monsters. If ordered the massacre of infants, he might find that many of his warriors would refuse. The old code still meant something to some of them. While fought this battle of words, something unexpected began to happen in the city of Haven. The surviving colonists started coming out of their hiding places. They were not armed and they did not attack the warriors. They simply walked through the streets toward the medical facility. They carried supplies in their arms, food and water and medicine and blankets. The warriors watched with confusion. They had been told to kill these creatures, but the humans walked past them without looking at them. They acted as if the giant reptilian aliens were not even there. An old man with a white beard carried a basket of bread. A young woman pushed a cart filled with bottles of water. A teenage boy carried medical supplies on his back. They all walked toward the nursery. The warriors looked at each other, but no one gave orders to stop them. Something about this silent parade of humans made them hesitate. Hank found standing outside the nursery entrance. Hank was wounded. There was blood on his uniform and exhaustion on his face, but he was still standing. He looked at the alien commander with tired eyes. Hank asked what was happening. Shook his massive head slowly. He said he did not understand it himself, but he told Hank that his warriors would not harm anyone who approached this place. He gave his word. Hank stared at him for a long moment. An hour ago this alien had been trying to destroy the colony. Now he was offering protection. It did not make sense. Hank said that an hour ago they were killing his people. He admitted that was true, but he said that an hour ago he did not know that humans would die for children that were not their own blood. He had not known that such creatures existed. They stood together in awkward silence. Around them, humans continued to arrive at the nursery. Some carried supplies, others simply came to help in any way they could. Grandmothers and teenagers and farmers and teachers, all of them walking toward the underground facility where 47 Barbies waited. Inside the nursery, Hayes welcomed each new arrival. She put them to work immediately. There were Barbies to feed and diapers to change and little ones who needed to be held. The work never stopped. By dawn, the nursery was surrounded by warriors, but they were not attacking. They were standing guard, their weapons pointed outward at the darkness, protecting the facility instead of threatening it. One of the younger warriors approached and asked why they were doing this. Why were they protecting human offspring? Looked at the young warrior for a long moment. Then he told him to go inside and see for himself. The warrior hesitated. He had been trained to kill humans, not to visit them, but he trusted his commander. He walked down the stairs into the nursery. He came back up an hour later. His eyes were different somehow, softer. He told that one of the human females had asked him to hold a baby. She had shown him how to support its head and rock it gently. The baby had fallen asleep in his arms. He understood. Throughout the night, more warriors went down into the nursery. Each one came back changed. Something about holding a helpless infant in their arms reminded them of what they had forgotten, reminded them that they were more than killers. Hayes treated each warrior the same way. She welcomed them without fear. She showed them how to care for the Barbies. She spoke to them in her calm, gentle voice and called them by name. By morning, she was teaching a group of warriors how to properly fold a diaper. The sight of 8-foot-tall reptilian killers learning infant care from a tiny old human woman was something no one would ever forget. High Commander would arrive soon, and when he did, everything might fall apart. But for now, in this one moment, there was peace. High Commander arrived on the planet 3 days after the invasion began. His personal shuttle landed at the edge of Haven, and he stepped out with 50 of his most loyal guards around him. He expected to find chaos. He expected to find in chains or dead. He expected to see the colony burning. Instead, he found something that made no sense at all. The streets of Haven were quiet but not empty. Humans walked freely through the city without fear. Some of them were repairing damaged buildings. Others were clearing debris from the roads. And everywhere he looked, he saw warriors helping them. 2 of his elite soldiers were carrying lumber for a human construction team. 3 more were helping to distribute food from a supply wagon. The sight made his blood run cold with anger. He marched through the streets toward the medical facility where he had been told he would find. Humans looked at him as he passed. They did not run or scream or hide. They just looked at him with calm, curious eyes. When reached the nursery, he found even stranger things. Human children were playing in the courtyard outside the entrance. Older children who could walk and talk. They ran around the legs of warriors and laughed without fear. One small boy was sitting on the shoulders of a warrior who was at least 8 feet tall. Pushed past the guards and descended into the underground facility. What he found there made him stop in his tracks. Commander was sitting in a chair in the middle of the nursery. In his massive arms, he held a human infant. The baby was tiny against his scaled chest. It was wrapped in a soft blanket and it was sleeping peacefully. Demanded to know the meaning of this. Looked up at him without fear. He said the baby's name was Grace. She had been born during the initial assault on the colony. Her parents had been killed in the bombardment. One of the nurses had asked if he would hold her while she tended to the other infants. Stepped closer, his voice was shaking with anger. He told that he was a commander of the Red Dragon Pack. Commanders did not hold human Barbies. Carefully placed Grace back in her incubator. He stood up slowly and faced the High Commander. He said that he was and among the young were sacred. He said he had forgotten that truth. These humans had reminded him of it. Called it treason. Agreed that perhaps it was, but he said he had learned something important in the past 3 days. He told that these humans were soft and fragile and short-lived creatures. They had no claws or fangs or armor. They died easily and they lived barely a century, but they would die for children they had never met. They would stand unarmed against warriors who were 3 times their size. They would give their last food to an enemy's orphan. Walked around the nursery as he spoke. He pointed to the incubators and the volunteers and the nurses who were still caring for the infants. He told that the Red Dragon Pack had conquered 47 worlds. They had killed millions of creatures across the galaxy, but in all that time, they had never found a species that would shelter the young of another race. They had never met a people who would die to protect Barbies that shared none of their blood. Asked what point was trying to make. Said they had been fighting the wrong war, that took slaves and harvested resources. They left nothing but ash and bones behind them, but look at what these humans had built. Farms that fed thousands of people, hospitals that saved lives, schools that taught children, and when the Red Dragon Pack came to destroy it all, the humans did not fight for themselves, they fought for their Barbies. He gestured to a corner of the nursery where Hayes was showing a group of young warriors how to swaddle a newborn. The old woman spoke patiently and the warriors listened carefully. One of them she was a female warrior who had personally killed over 100 enemies in battle. Now she was gently holding a human infant while adjusted her grip. Told that 3 days ago his warriors wanted to kill, today they called her elder mother and brought her gifts of food. They did this because she showed them kindness when they deserved death. Stared at the scene before him, his certainty was starting to crack. He asked what he expected them to do now. Said he wanted to leave. He wanted the fleet to depart and never return. He wanted to tell the Red Dragon Pack that this world was protected by the old code. He wanted him to tell everyone that the humans had earned their right to survive. Asked what would happen too. Looked around at the infants in their incubators. He looked at the humans and working together. He looked at the future being built in this small underground room. He said he would stay. Someone needed to make sure the old code was followed. Someone needed to protect what was growing here. Departed that afternoon. His shuttle rose into the sky and vanished beyond the clouds. His report to the leaders of the Red Dragon Pack was simple. He said New Eden was not worth the cost of conquering. He said the humans there had nothing of value. It was a lie, but it was a lie that saved 12,000 lives. In the years that followed, New Eden became something that had never existed before. It became a bridge between two species who were tired of war came to settle there. They learned how to farm and build. They learned how to live without killing. Humans traveled to worlds as ambassadors. They carried with them the lesson that had stopped a massacre. They taught other species that love for the innocent could transcend any boundary. And at the center of it all, Hayes continued her work as a midwife. She delivered Barbies of both species now, human infants and hatchlings. She treated them all the same. She welcomed them all into the world with gentle hands and a warm voice. The nursery that had once been a desperate refuge became a symbol. It reminded everyone that even the fiercest killers could be transformed by the sight of ordinary people choosing love over fear. Commander became elder. He served as an advisor to the Colonial Council for the rest of his life. He became godfather to 17 human children. He never forgot the moment he first entered that nursery and saw what humanity truly was. Humans were small, they were fragile, they lived barely 100 years. But they would die for any child anywhere without hesitation. They would give everything they had to protect the innocent. And that made them the most remarkable species in the galaxy. Not because they were warriors. Because they were guardians. Not because they were killers. Because they were protectors. The Red Dragon Pack had arrived on New Eden looking for victims. They had found something far more powerful instead. They had found a species that loved without limit. And that love had changed everything.